Ricky, right, still a full audience. That's good. Stay with us. Right, the next session is titled, Can we cyber secure the fintech dream? Can we cyber secure the fintech dream? What it means is, as recent ransomware attacks have shown us, the modern enterprise has never been more vulnerable to cyber attacks. Are online security breaches now a fact of life? What can existing security providers do to prevent this? How are the futures of fintech and cybersecurity interlocked? Attempting to answer these questions, can you welcome to the stage, please, Pat Phelan of TransUnion, Ron Atzmon of AU10TIX, and David Excel of FeatureSpace, all in conversation with Eric Oshar of Reuters.
Great. We're going to start with some introductions, and then we're going to get into some examples. This panel is billed as cybersecurity, but really the people on this panel are fraud prevention experts. So we're really going to try to talk about the interplay between some of the things they defend and deal with every day, and the way that some of the cyber issues are starting to come into the world of fraud. Maybe we could start, David, with just a little bit about your company and sort of how you see emerging issues in the fraud world.
Right. My name's David. I founded a company called FeatureSpace that revolutionized the technology called adaptive behavioral analytics. So we use machine learning to profile customer data and understand the behaviors of each of those customers. One of the key things that we do is we understand what good behavior is, and we model and profile that, then look at what are the changes against a good interaction from a customer, which enables us to identify anomalies and then also fraud within that anomalous data set. When we work with financial institutions, we provide an end-to-end fraud service where we look at a customer from when they apply their application through all their interactions with the bank, from account maintenance, money movement, and customer service interactions, to build a holistic picture of what the fraudster is doing. We also work with acquirers and issuers, and there we provide fraud scores on individual transactions. Some of the trends that I see in the industry at the moment is the quality of data that fraudsters now have. They're no longer making up identities and trying to create accounts using that. There's lots of good quality data that they're able to acquire very cheaply so that they can create very legitimate looking accounts and use those to be able to perpetrate their fraud. We're also seeing fraudsters become more sophisticated in their knowledge of what banks are using to be able to prevent fraud. So point solutions that just look at either application or they just look at a credit card, fraudsters are able to work between each of those fraud systems and be able to use the shortcomings in not having a holistic view of what that customer is doing.
Ron, why don't you explain and maybe talk a little bit about the issue he raised, where there's more and more information available to attackers, fraudsters, the ability to build profiles and spoof people.
So we're an image processing shop, and our core competence, we're dealing with identifying documents. Our heritage, we come from immigration control and airport security. That's our bread and butter for the last more than 20 years. And about 9 years ago, we started diversifying to financial services because the drivers of, the major drive was compliance. Basel II check the documents for KYC and also complemented with a face compare capability. We serve, different vectors, if it's like banks or wallet like PayPal or Google or lenders or one of the challenger banks in the UK. If we look about what are we seeing in the market, so we see that people are connecting, data and everything. We see that there was a trend, I would say 7-8 years ago, to be dependent on data. But the problem is that because of the fast spread of online and things becoming more mobile, the amount of data starts to exist becomes more and more available to everybody. If it's either it's protected or not protected, so it's relatively easy to hackers and fraudsters to collect the data and to collect enough to be like I, um, digital identities, either real ones or synthetic ones, as Pat and I had discussed this yesterday. And so the way to tackle it is to complement it with documents and biometrics on the front end, so you can connect the real world into the virtual world. So finding that connectivity, so not that it stops everything, but it makes life a bit more complicated for the fraudsters. But also from the other side, it then from a compliance point of view, it also makes stuff be much more compliant with the laws of the different states that we operate in.
Pat, you want to talk a little
Sorry.
bit about?
My name is Pat Phelan, and I'm the Senior Vice President of Identity Services at TransUnion. TransUnion is a global credit bureau. Previous to that, I founded a company called Trusted for digital online fraud detection. TransUnion acquired it about 18 months ago, and I moved in to become to lead that division in TransUnion. We work with every fintech in North America. Would be a credit customer of ours. In Europe, we work with companies like Vodafone, Telefonica, Camper, etc., Nets. So we run a digital fraud in Europe for mostly in the e-com space. And in the US, we have a very large presence in e-com, but also a very large presence in fintech. We when TransUnion acquired us, they took me on this roadshow into their verticals. And the first vertical we stopped at was fintech. I met all the leaders of all the fintech companies that work with TransUnion, and all of them told me they had no fraud and everything was amazing. I was quite shocked at this, as you can imagine. And I went back to TransUnion and I ran all the data, and what we found was that they thought they had no fraud, but they had a real big problem with first payment default, and they had a real big problem with collections. And we built this product, we called it the Fraud Prevention Exchange. We've got 22 customers in fintech for this product. And what it does is it does a fraud check. We extract the elements from the fraud check, and we operate this as an exchange. So it means that traditionally bureaus have been 30 days delayed. So what we've done is we've built a real-time digital bureau between the fintech lenders, so that they're able to see in real time, here's customer A, he's trying to borrow from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 at the same time. Here's customer B, he's only borrowing from 1. So that's been really, really successful. We're just about to launch it into Canada with a card scheme operation, and we're probably in the next quarter going to bring it to the UK. So it's been very, very successful.
So this is the loan stacking you were describing.
This is it's called loan stacking. Most of the fintechs thought that they had credit hungry customers, but in reality, it's people stacking loans in a very efficient manner to take as much as they can, maybe for synthetic, maybe for bust out, or maybe they're going bankrupt and want to, get ready for a nuclear winter with your money.
So for everyone, how has fraud prevention evolved, and what's been happening in recent years where maybe the traditional types of fraud you were designed to thwart are becoming more and more like cyber attacks? How are those worlds kind of merging?
So basically, it's fraud, cyber. The incentive is the same incentive. They want either to blackmail you or to hit the system, or so. So I think separating fraud and cyber, I think they should all be in the same bucket, because just an article a couple of hours ago from the LA Times about how the state of California is trying to see how they can deal with fraud prevention because they see lots of cyber attacks coming from the different retailers in the U.S., like Target, and in these sunny days, and how these attackers that are breaching the databases in business and customers.
And they're also going after the government databases in order to breach.
Exactly. So they attack the government, they attack the retailers. It doesn't really matter. And so what they're trying to do is by collecting the data. So once you can collect the data, you can start doing different manipulation. Because of course there's the DDoS attack, which is something else that you try to drop your website, but it's only a very small segment in the cyber. Usually together is that what basically you try to do is to collect the data and then not just take ransom, but also maybe create additional, collect additional money from, like either doing account takeovers or trying to taking loans and not repaying them. So it's everything in the same bucket. So separating these two pieces is not.
David, using your machine learning, how are you able to spot this sort of profile building effort that fraudsters are doing? Is that something that's part of your product?
Yeah, definitely. And I guess what we see is that with the vast amount of data that fraudsters now have access to and the automation techniques, is they can continue to use that data to continue fraud attacks non-stop against the financial services institution. So for us, we have to profile lots of different norms about what do we expect in terms of application rates, what a legitimate application looks like, so you can get rid of that noise and essentially then enable the fraud ops team to get rid of the low-hanging fruit in terms of fraud and then really concentrate on where the value of fraud is taking place. And that's where the human needs to get involved in understanding the fraud, which is sort of a lot more sophisticated in terms of money actually going in and out of the bank.
Maybe you could regale us with your story from Venezuela. It's a really amazing anecdote about a fraud attack. It's more like a cyber attack.
So what we're seeing is when I started the original company, Trust, of about 4 years ago, we worked with a ton of e-commerce merchants, guys buying stolen cards on the dark web, get some shirts for $100 that they sell on eBay, and that's gone. That's easy to catch. Those days are over. What we're seeing now is a move to cyber intelligence in fraud, where they're building dramatic farms. This example was a customer of ours is a very large US apparel company that at 6:15 on a Friday night, when they knew the manual review team had left the building, there was a system turned on to attack them. It was 100 virtual machines. The VMs were stacked on AWS. They had names matching emails. They had 100 different drop shippers, 10,000 different cards. Everything was just turned in rotation. Now, they'd made some slightly basic mistakes. AWS IP addresses are public. So we thought, hey, what's going on here? Why are we seeing this dramatic increase in what we saw as bot traffic? And the other one was on device ID. We saw that there was nothing for screens on the devices. So we have our own device ID. But that attack started at 6:15 p.m. on a Friday evening. We got her under control about 4:40 a.m. on a Sunday morning. The customer lost very little, a couple of grand. The total attack was $6.6 million. And that was ran out of, we'd never seen it before. That was ran out of Caracas, Venezuela, all using Yandex emails. So, these guys are coming together. This is, if you're lending 5, 10, 20, 30 grand, they're going to consider this a job. They're going to make a proper effort here. This isn't, hey, you got threat metrics for device ID, or you've got someone for X, you've got some type of point solution. This isn't going to work here. It's just not. You need platform. They're working as hard as you. The other thing which I see quite funny as well is where a company says, we're going to do it internally. It's a bit like servicing your own car. It's pretty pointless, and that's why you should come to guys like us.
I think we have to come up with a new term, because what you're describing sounds like a distributed denial of service.
Exactly.
But it's a financial
DDoS for fraud.
Yeah, I mean, they're actually not just pinging you with dumb data, they're actually going after things at a mass scale.
You know, if you saw on Black Friday, I won't mention the name, they're not a customer of ours, but a major US retailer went down on Black Friday and it's caused them untold damage. And I was told it was as a result of one of these attacks.
Maybe we could talk about just how do we stop treating security as kind of an add-on, and how do the people in the audience build security into their products? I mean, fraud prevention. I mean, are we being outclassed defensively?
I think it's funny, and I'm sorry for hogging. When you talk to a company, you say, hey, you know, you're lending 100 million a year, and the concentration on fraud is 0.05% of engineering time. Concentrating on marketing is 0.20%.
Yeah.
So, but the losses are, you know, if we can turn more on marketing, that gap is enormous. And I think people aren't taking it seriously enough. I think in fraud, the guys who are there a long time are there a long time. But I do think there's a change, and I do think that the losses are going to become much more dramatic over a shorter period, and that will cause change in itself.
Yes, also I think fraudsters thrive on complexity. So when there's a complex process within a bank or a financial services, that gives fraudsters a bigger attack surface in where they can identify loopholes in that process. So for me, keeping things simple and making sure you really understand and have a robust process helps you mitigate a lot of those fraud losses.
So help me understand. Both of you are effectively platform providers, whereas you hook into platforms.
We don't really. I would say we enable platforms.
Yeah.
So I want to approach. Okay, how do we do this? So thinking as a fraud prevention, that's not. I would say that it's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is, okay, how do we make the customer journey good, and also how we make their follow-up experience also good, because if someone feels that you haven't protected his data and you compromise him, he will not be anymore your customer. So if you're looking at just from the fraud point of view, it's okay. And also fraud is, you know, that you said, you know, you went to some place and said they had no fraud. I went to a bank here in Spain, you know, one guy said, oh, fraud, you have his BP came and said fraud. We don't have any fraud. Fraud is a reputation issue. You need to look at the other way around. You need to look at how you better serve your customer in the onboarding process. And once you onboarded him, then how do you take care of him in the ongoing process? If it's a bank or if you're a retailer, because if I use, for example, Gap or H&M on the online presence, I'm a repeated customer. So I want to make sure that when I come back, my data is still protected, and I want to feel comfortable and safe to continue doing the purchasing. If it's a retailer, if it's a financial service, so there needs to be a shift of mind. This is not about fraud protection. It's about giving good service to your customers.
I think that's a brilliant point. That's the key here, because what happens is it goes from one swing to the other. So we had a customer recently who came to us and they were being hugely attacked. They were losing about 300K a month. They were in services. But what they done was they had an inexperienced fraud team. They were now losing 300K. They were refusing 18% of good customers as well. And that's the problem. That false positive. You know, we're finding that when you do put a good fraud system, you increase revenues by 2%.
Okay. We have to finish it here.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.